Now, I know a friend of mine named Gemma. She was scared of clowns, and this happened to her sometime when she was a young kid. I can't remember how old exactly she was, but we'll just say she was around 12 years old. Gemma was home alone that night as both her parents had to work late due to some circumstances when it came to their work. Now, Gemma was usually alone with her brother, who was 17, but he was at a party, so she was alone. She, of course, had her cat, and of course, his name was Merlin, and Merlin was a pretty sweet cat. While Gemma was pretty much just watching TV, she all of a sudden got a knock at the door from someone. Of course, they had a peephole at the door, and of course, the front door windows have blinds, so thankfully nobody could see in. Well, not really technically blinds, but they were one of those blinds that could close all the way, just to make sure no one could see through them. However, through the peephole Gemma looked through, she could see that there was a clown. It was obviously someone dressed in a clown costume, and knowing how terrified of clowns she was, she honestly didn't even know why this clown was here and what he was doing. He appeared to be holding some balloons and was just waiting around for a bit. Hopefully, maybe there might be some sort of way he can get her to open the door. Gemma did not want to open the door with that clown there, so she wasn't sure what to do, but then she decided to go upstairs, she made sure her front door was locked, and then she went upstairs with her cell phone and called 911. While on the phone with the police, she ended up hearing what seemed like someone banging on the door. Honestly, she had a feeling it was that guy in the clown costume. He started banging at the door, and she was praying to God and hope he did not break through. Of course, it happened for a good long while when, meanwhile, within more bangs, she heard police sirens in the distance. The police eventually arrived, but the clown eventually escaped and he was nowhere to be found. Honestly, when she ended up expressing what the clown looked like and explained it to the police, they tried to see if they could find the clown, but they couldn't find him anywhere in the area. Of course, they patrolled the area at night, but however, though, they couldn't even find the clown, and they figured he must have ran off somewhere. That was the last time she's ever seen that clown, and she's very glad that she hasn't seen him since. She still isn't sure what would have happened to her if she let that clown in. Could he have a possibility of attempting to kidnap her, murder her, or rob her, or at least something? But God only knows what could have happened to her if she stayed there that night. She just isn't sure as to who was in that clown costume. She had thoughts thinking that maybe it could be someone pranking her. She's not even sure. She told her friends at school about it the next day, and they said that there was someone in a clown costume going around knocking on people's doors, and it had been happening for a few weeks. Of course, there was no trace of the clown, and they think maybe the clown might have gone off or something. But Gemma wants to really know if that clown was ever caught or not. She would like to think that the clown was caught. So this happened to one of my friends from elementary school named Rhiannon. Rhiannon was pretty much 13 at the time of the story, and this was around 2012. Rhiannon was with her best friend Mackenzie, and they were at a park one day after school. Since it was a Friday night, they decided to go to the park. This was around the springtime, so the sun was starting to go down, so they decided to head to the park that was not far from Rhiannon's house. As they were at the park, they were playing, and honestly, they were having a good time. It seemed to all go very well, when all of a sudden, there was some sort of clown-like laughter. Obviously, Rhiannon wasn't so sure as to who it was, but she ended up looking over to what seemed to be a clearing at the park. Obviously, it looked like a clown holding balloons, and he seemed to be staring at her from the street that was not far from where she was standing at. Obviously, she wasn't even sure as to who it was, and it honestly was just some person in a clown costume having balloons. Now, Rhiannon and Mackenzie were thinking maybe they should head back, but they didn't want to risk this clown following them home. Unsure and don't know what to do, they ended up staring at the clown when all of a sudden he ends up starting to chase him towards them from the football field. That's when Rhiannon and Mackenzie ended up running away from the park, and they ended up going in a zigzag pattern. They were praying to God and hoped the clown did not follow them home, and they finally got home when they locked the doors and stayed inside the house. They waited for a little while, but they couldn't find the clown, as the clown must have given up when he chased them. They ended up looking, but they couldn't find him anywhere, so they assumed that he must have left. Of course, the next day they went to the park again, but they couldn't find any traces of the clown, but they did find something really messed up and disturbing at the park. They saw some broken balloons and even some child's toys that were scattered around. They weren't sure as to if there was a murder took place, but it didn't look like it, but it looked like a kidnapping must have happened. Later on that same day, a news report said that there was a clown on the loose that happened to have kidnapped the young kids. Of course, Rhiannon and even Mackenzie were in shock. They didn't even expect them to find the clown, but they weren't really sure as to why this clown wanted to kidnap them or something. If that's what the clown really had in mind, was kidnapping the two of them, then I'm just really glad they're lucky they got away. If they hadn't gone away, then the story would have had a different outcome. This happened sometime in 2016 when the clown trend was still going on. This was around the summer of 2016, and this actually happened to an old friend of mine. Now, this happened to him when he was about maybe 25 years old at the time. We will call him by the name Steve. Steve lived at a house and an apartment in the place where in the city I used to grow up at. However, Steve was pretty much just biking with his good friend Gavin. Gavin and Steve had been biking for years since they were kids, and while they were biking, they ended up coming across what seems to be the forest area. Of course, it was late at night, so they decided to go and have a little trek down by going back to their house, and they ended up grabbing their stuff, such as, some camping gear and stuff, and they went into the forest to explore. While they were exploring the forest, everything seemed to be normal, of course with the occasional few little night critters that were still wandering around at night, but anything scary can pop out. However, Steve, along with Gavin, ended up seeing some red marks on the trees. Honestly, they weren't really sure as to why there were red marks on the trees, but at first they thought it must have been a lead way to the trail. They ended up walking through the forest for a little while when all of a sudden they heard some twigs and branches snapping. Of course, Gavin got a little nervous and said to Steve that maybe they should turn around, but Steve didn't want to turn around. Instead, he looked behind him to see that Gavin's face was pale. It honestly was pale as a sheet, but they honestly knew that someone or something was watching them. But they shrugged it off, thinking it was maybe their paranoia, so they continued to walk through the forest. After walking for a little bit, they all of a sudden came across what seemed to be a little shack. The little shack looked like it had been abandoned for years, and some vines were growing around the area. Honestly, they weren't really sure as to if they should go in that shack, but they had even thoughts on going in there just to have a little spook. Of course, Gavin tells Steve that he's no fun and that he's a chicken, etc. Of course, that's when Steve goes in there, but of course, they couldn't find anybody, and it honestly really frightens him knowing that there was someone in that shack. But there was nobody in the shack, thankfully, when they opened it. It appeared to be an abandoned house that appeared to be abandoned. Of course, Gavin thought it was a shack because they had passed by it a couple times, but it wasn't a shack. All of a sudden, as they were leaving, they all of a sudden saw what seemed to be someone wearing a clown costume with a mask. He appeared to have a red axe on him, and he started screaming while charging towards the two. Steve and Gavin screamed as they both ran away as fast as they could, and they even went to zigzag patterns. Since it was dark out, they couldn't really remember where they were at, but eventually they found the trail where they were on, and they went back up to their city. Well, not really city, but where they're close to their home. The clown kept following them, so they ended up deciding to go to the nearest police store. Not really police store, but police station. When they got to the police station, which was only about a couple minutes away, the clown never followed them again, but they gave him the description of what the clown looked like. Of course, the next day the cops were sent to investigate the area where the clown was saw, but they didn't find him anywhere. Assuming that the clown must have got away, or maybe it was just some prank. Gavin and even Steve do not even want to go back there at night, thinking that clown might still be there. What was this clown's intentions was unknown to them. Still to this day, Steve and even Gavin are still wondering what could have happened to them if they stayed a minute later in that cabin alone, or shack or house. I know I say it's like that because it kind of looks like a shack from a far distance, but upon closer inspection, it is actually a house. Now, Stephen and Gavin never saw that house again, but they ever wondered if someone was truly living in there. Could have been the clown that was living there? That was their mystery, but they are not returning to that forest to find out.